Everyone. A warm welcome and thank you for joining us. I'd just like to make you all aware that today's session is being recorded, and that's purely to allow others to benefit from the insights shared during this important conversation. I'm Arva Valika. I'm the Director of Operations at CiC, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. I'm delighted, absolutely overjoyed to be joined by two exceptional guest speakers, Jason and Fawzia, whose perspectives and experiences will help us navigate some of the pressing issues of our time. What I'd like to say before I do the introductions is that in a world marked by political upheaval, rising conflict, and deepening social divides, how do we actually move beyond surface level inclusion to genuinely celebrate difference? Workplaces are not immune to the world's unrest. From global conflict to policy shifts, the world is changing, and so are the emotional needs of people. And this session is about engaging with that reality courageously and honestly, and exploring what it truly means to create spaces of empathy, psychological safety, and belonging when it matters the most. So I would like to now introduce our two guests. I'm going to start with Dr. Fawzia Hanif Khan. She's a lecturer, senior teaching fellow within the Faculty of Medicine at Imperial College London, which now I've been told I think is being called Imperial University. And she was part of the National Heart and Lung Institute, where she leads the MSc Genes, Drugs, and Stem Cells. Fawzia is also the director of the Drug Student Research Network. Over the past 6 years, she has significantly contributed to student recruitment and admissions, public engagement and outreach, and student welfare support. She's an ambassador for the British Pharmacological Society, and Fawzia's commitment to excellence was recognized in May 2024 last year when she was awarded the Imperial College President's Gold Medal for Excellence in Teaching. That's fantastic, Fawzia. And in addition to all of this, Fawzia is a champion for women in the field of education and a member of the college's EDI committee. And she believes in promoting diversity and inclusion and is committed to empowering women in the field. So thank you for joining us today, Fawzia. And I'd like to now turn to Jason. With a background in occupational therapy, Jason is the Transformation Director at Ingis UK and is passionate about driving diversity and inclusion at the workplace and in our communities, particularly for people with disabilities and the LGBTQIA plus community. Jason became an amputee at the age of 10. He's going to tell you a bit more about his story personally himself after being born without muscles below his knee and his right leg. He has represented Australia in 2 Paralympics as well and won a couple of medals, which he's going to speak about. I'm not going to take his shine away. But more recently, he has become involved with para standing tennis, a version of the game designed to drive greater inclusion. So, this is a great roundtable, where we've got 2 guest speakers from different backgrounds and different life experiences and skills. So I would like to again say thank you very much for joining. The structure will be, we'll have some roundtable question answers with the 2 guest speakers. Any questions that any of you have along the way, just put it in the chat, please. We've got a member of our CiC team, Jake. He is going to monitor the questions, and right towards the end, then we will address those questions. And I'm hoping that's okay for all of you. It's best to just write the questions as they come into your mind in case you forget it towards the end. So without wasting much more time, my first question to both of you is that in today's climate marked by conflict, division, and policy shifts, what does real inclusion look like to both of you? And I think I'd like to start this off with Jason, yourself.
Thanks, Ava, and lovely to meet you, Fawzia. And thank you, everyone. I see we've just cracked the ton, gone over 100 people involved, so welcome, everyone. Nice to be here with you today. We were talking about what does real inclusion look like, and it's challenging to achieve these days with particularly the global picture at the moment. But I've always been a big believer that the starting point should almost be a utopian vision of it, and that is kind of like universal access, universal inclusion, not here's the main access for everybody, or the main inclusion, or the main option for everyone. Oh, but we'll include this, this, and this for these other people. That's still better than nothing. But the idea would be it's for instance, to use a disability access example, that it's one entrance to the building that is a wheelchair accessible or whatever it might be, because everybody can use that. People with prams, people with trolleys, people with wheelchairs. It's a global solution to that. That's the starting point. Then reality dictates something different. You work backwards from there. So for me, real inclusion is about starting with that universal vision.
Thank you. And that's and I think you just hit the nail on the head, isn't it? Sometimes it's about going back to the very basics.
Mm-hmm.
And also thank you. And Fawzia, what are your views on what real inclusion looks like in the midst of what's happening around the world?
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for a really lovely introduction. We kind of forget what we've achieved, and so when someone speaks about this, you almost feel, is this me? Again, comes back to inclusivity. So for me, inclusion is a sense of belonging. So I'm coming from a different perspective where I deal with students a lot, and I engage with young people. And when I say young people, sort of this is 18 and over. And it's almost, and they're coming from different cultures and they're coming from different religions. And so for me, inclusion is bringing those people together in a way where they're heard, where they feel safe. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this, and where, they can be, they feel belong to that particular institution, that particular department. It's the sense of belonging. For me, I think it's the sense of belonging. They feel proud to belong to a place without having sort of identity crisis.
And that's really interesting, because I think I heard you say the word heard. I saw somebody the other day I saw her on the news, and I think what she said, and it really resonated with me. And she said, "I'm seen, but I'm not heard." And I think that's what stood out for me at the back of what you said. And you used the word heard, and that's where real belonging starts to take place, where you're actually heard as well. And Jason, I'd like you, I don't know if you remember the example you shared with me when we had this conversation a few weeks ago about, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And, you brought in this amazing example of dancing. I don't want to take credit for it. So, I would really, So I'd really like you to share that example with the group as, one of those fantastic starting opening statements, because I think it captures it all.
I haven't got it in front of me. Oh, hang on, do I?
But
Sorry.
it's that's not a problem. But it was about,
Here it is. Here it is. Sorry, I'll just open this up, so I don't want to get it wrong. Come on, you can do it, computer.
While Jason is opening up, I read somewhere, and I just noted it because I thought that's just so to the point. Diversity is being invited to the room. Inclusion is being asked to speak, and then equity is making sure you're heard and valued.
And I think and that's brilliant, isn't it? That's very similar to what Jason and I discussed. And I remember, Jason, so you don't really need to bring refresh your memory, but it really resonated with me, where I think the example was diversity is where you invite everyone to the dance floor. Inclusion is where everyone comes on the dance floor and dances.
Yeah, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, and belonging is dancing like no one's watching.
And I think that's a great example. So we got there eventually. It's a great example. And I don't know how many of you were fans of Friends, how many of you watched Friends. There was this one episode of Phoebe where she was running in the park, and running exactly how she wants to. And I remember Rachel was just highly embarrassed, did not want to associate with her and all, but how in the end she actually did it herself. And it was a sense of uplifting feeling. And I think the reason I brought that example in is that sometimes you forget the very simple things about inclusion. diversity is one thing, but inclusion goes and takes it that one step further. And that's why I brought in about what I read the other day, where this one person on the news said that I'm seen, but I'm not heard. And that is absolutely critical in anything to do with diversity and inclusion, especially with what's happening around the world at the moment. And Jason, following on from that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just talk to you that you've been quite open about your journey since childhood. And what do you think are the blind spots you still see when it comes to disability inclusion? And how can leaders address them meaningfully rather than just as a tick box or more performatively?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a big question, and you could probably write a dissertation on that alone. But for me, for those who don't know, I became an amputee when I was 10, was never embarrassed by it or anything, but it was not something I was proud of as such. It was just there, right? It was just part of me. Got involved in the Paralympics in the late 80s, early 90s, and I probably rode that wave quite a lot through my life. In fact, just last month, I went back to Barcelona and went and revisited the pool where I swam for the Paralympics in '92, and had a really good chat to my 22-year-old self. And it was quite emotive because that's a fairly significant moment. That particular race, standing right there, and it's defined my life and in so many ways. So it was a really powerful moment to revisit that. I won't lie, I shed a tear or two, but it was quite powerful. With disability, as I've gotten involved in the EDI movement, if you like, I've often used that Paralympic card to my advantage to get a foot in the door, so to speak. At least it doesn't hurt if it slams. So to be able to promote disability inclusion, I've played that Paralympic card. Where I think that the blind spot is, and what I've realised this, it took me some time to realise this, is that I think we actually need to, bless you, we actually need to focus on making disability ordinary. That's, some of you will have heard me say that before. I think we tend to see disability as either these mountain climbing, marathon running, Paralympic going, inspirational people, or totally dependent at the other end and unable to support themselves. We forget about this part in between, the ordinary. Going shopping, going to the theatre, catching public transport, doing a job, having a relationship, all that kind of stuff that is the day to day. And that's the blind spot. We're focused on celebrating these either ends or putting up posters about one or the other. And we need to focus on this ordinary. And I think that's what managers need to do and workplaces need to do, is to look at opportunities for people with disability to be seen being ordinary, to be seen doing the everyday. In terms of the LGBT side of things, that I only came out 6 or 7 years ago, so I've only sort of gotten involved in that part later. But, that in itself is a story as to, I wasn't ready to dance like no one's watching because there were barriers to me feeling included. So, workplace, but there are many parallels between LGBT and disability in terms of putting that information on the table. Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
No, that's great. And I'm disabled myself, Jason, and for me, I think making it in the everyday language and just making it that ordinary, how you've said, I think is critical for any workplace to be successful and truly inclusive, where someone feels that they can belong in that workforce, and whatever sector it might be, whether it's academia, construction, a charity, a bank, it doesn't really matter. So thank you for that. Any thoughts on that, Fawzia, at the back of what Jason has said?
So, you touch on sort of the physical disability where you can actually see that, we can also have lots of neurodiverse people as well.
Exactly.
And sometimes those are not seen, unless you talk about it. But we need to celebrate something. I think over the years and since I was little, things have changed and things have improved remarkably. And I think we need to, first of all, celebrate that. That's a very positive impact. Neurodiversity has become huge now.
Yeah.
And I think we're probably all at that similar age where it was very hidden. It was something that was never recognized, and it was something that was, you don't speak about it. And like I said before, I deal with a lot of students, and they're very willing to talk about their situation, whatever it could be. They know where to get help. They are willing to get help. And that is something amazing. However, this is the new generation that I feel that barrier is still there for anyone who's sort of, 5 or 10 years older,
Yeah.
because it wasn't part of their life.
Mhm.
It's becoming a lot better now. So, neurodiverse is huge, and we also need to celebrate that. We need to have more awareness of this. And I think it's the awareness, right? The more you make people aware and there's practices in place, the better it will be.
You're absolutely right. And I think part of this is, again, coming back to of normalizing the narrative at a workplace. The more you normalize it, the more it becomes an everyday part of your language, your professional language.
Absolutely.
That's where it'll encourage people to talk more and more about it. You have to invite people. You have to allow them, to speak about it as much as they want to. You can't force people to speak about it, but at least having that awareness there. And that's where managers and leaders have a huge responsibility, but also the organization at the top level has a responsibility to make sure that the managers and leaders are going through either proper training or awareness sessions to make it part of their everyday language. Very easy for me to say, let's make it part of the everyday language. I might be able to do it very comfortably. Somebody else might not. So, they might want to, but they don't know how to. And that's
Yeah.
what's the responsibility of an organization to make it either part of the induction or the development, so that we start to normalize all of this. And that's where inclusion and belonging comes right up there. I'm going to move a bit on, if that's okay. And this is an interesting question. And let's see who I go to first. And it is, how do global conflicts and shifting Western policies around identity and rights ripple into the workplace? And what's the emotional toll we're overlooking? Because I'm hoping from this we'll move on to eventually on psychological safety. But I'm curious to see, how do global conflicts and shifting Western policies around identity and rights ripple into workplaces? Any of you can go first. Fawzia, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So I think we first have to just acknowledge they exist, and it's ongoing, and it impacts all of us. Whether it's happening within our locally or internationally. Unfortunately, we cannot have sort of very specific practices in place because we have absolutely no idea what's going on from month to month, day to day, and so on forth. It is difficult. So let's again acknowledge that it is difficult. It's difficult for the leaders. It's difficult for my workplace. It's difficult for the staff, and it's also very difficult for my students. And over the past 5 years since COVID, I have seen many cases where it's really impacting the students. When it impacts the students, and I'll speak very reflectively on this, when it impacts the students, it impacts me. Being a mother, coming from that sort of like the ethnic background, I know how there's cultural differences. It impacts me. So we have things in places for the students where they can seek help and where they can go and whatever, where it's sort of kind of almost, I wouldn't say stop, but you almost have to just get on with your life, is
Right.
Where do we go? When you absorb so much from different people around you, where do you go? How do you manage yourself? Because some of the stories still impact me to this day, and I feel like I want to reach out to them, but obviously they've left now. But I feel like I would like to reach out to see if they're okay. So yes, there are going to be conflict in the world. How do we direct, and how do we maneuver ourselves for us to have a safe place to talk?
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's probably what we need, right? We need, again, is that inclusion and is that belonging where you are heard. How do we put those in workplace practices? What do we have to do?
Yeah.
I think firstly, we need to start talking about it. We need to start acknowledging it.
Right.
We can't just bury it under the carpet and say this is it. It'll go away. It doesn't go away because one conflict another will start, another will start. So we need to start having these conversations, just like what we're having.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. And I'm going to just come in a second to yourself, Jason, but with a slightly tweaked question of, we can specifically see changes in the US. We've got to address the elephant in the room and talk about that we can see the changes in the US. Yes, we're in the UK. But what are your views, Jason, on any impact of that, what's happening on UK at the back of that?
Yeah, actually, just before I come to that,
Sure.
I just want to comment on something Fuzzy said. When we first had a conversation a few weeks ago, Fuzzy, that was my blind spot, I've got to admit, the impact of international conflict on well-being and
Sure.
people feeling included at work. And we ran some roadshows within the Inges Has team just recently for about 800 of our staff. And based on that and some other information I got, we did an acknowledgement at the beginning of the roadshows that we get that there's these international conflicts are making people feel uncomfortable about raising issues. I don't want to raise that that conflict in the Middle East is having this impact on me because if someone might judge that or they might think I'm pro-Israel, or they might think I'm pro-Palestine, or they might think whatever. And so they're worried about those things. So anyway, we did a bit of an acknowledgement at the start of these roadshows around that. I had no idea how powerful that would be. The feedback I received later, thank you so much for saying that. That made me feel so much better, so much more included, so much safer, and had a real impact on people. So first of all, thank you for opening my eyes to that. That was good. But in terms of what's happening in the US, and the government's agenda there around almost rolling back EDI, the gains that have been made in EDI, I've always said, and this might be controversial, and I apologise to anyone who feels that I'm crossing lines, with disability discrimination, it's usually ignorance. People don't realise what people with disability can do or can't do. With race discrimination or LGBT discrimination, there's an emotional component as well. A hatred, if you want to use a really strong word. Hate the gays or hate this group or whatever it might be. And that often drives that. But disability hasn't had that. But what we're seeing, some of the comments made after, for instance, the plane crash in America, and the president's there talking about, it was a diversity hire. Someone, you implied it was someone with a disability working in the control tower that caused the crash. So suddenly it's throwing people with disability under the bus, so to speak, and creating that hatred and dislike towards that group as well. So that's the first time I've noticed that as well. But so when you've got someone in those key roles, in government roles, sort of saying these things and that these are bad people and these people can't do this, it reinforces all the negative stereotypes for any of those groups, any of those cohorts. Yeah. And that makes it more challenging for people in those groups to make progress. Or someone in the chat has made a comment there about asking for reasonable adjustments. And, they're saying got to be quite assertive, particularly if your disability is not so obvious. It is like coming out. It is like coming out as a gay person. You've got to come out as having a disability because you're worried about the negative attitudes people are going to respond with. And when those negative attitudes are being accelerated and perpetuated by those in power, it makes it even worse. It makes it even harder. I really feel for people in the States at the moment who are in those categories, in those areas. So.
Interesting, and lots, I suppose, lots to take away from that. And I also feel that, the back of what's happening internationally, and just continuing about what you said of the changes in the US, I do feel managers, leaders, and even peers have a responsibility to be vigilant and aware and being more tuned into staff, even more, than ever before. Because silently, somebody in our workplace could be suffering from what is happening in the US, and we don't know that. And, we should be allowed to have what's called professional curiosity and a human curiosity to ask people, how are you doing? How are you feeling? You know, um, some people you might not have family in US, we shouldn't feel worried or scared and saying, oh, in the midst of what's happening in the US with the changes, you don't have to put a negative spin to it because it might not be impacting them negatively, but it's just asking them, oh, I know you've got family in the US with all these current changes. Is everything okay with you? But you've got to be, you don't, you shouldn't need permission to ask that. That's your human
Yes.
side coming in, isn't it? And I feel sometimes we feel we're not allowed to ask that.
So, Arvid, really, good point. And it's making it a norm, normalizing this as well, that you
Yeah.
ask each other how you are. Is everything okay? How does it impact you? Do you want to talk about it? Or, what is going on? And it's okay to have different views. We're human beings of different background and different thoughts. It's okay. It's fine. Um, I do understand and I do acknowledge someone from my background, academic, we are required to stay neutral because we are working with very young people and we have to remain neutral. And I absolutely understand that. That's our professional, but there's also, the well-being of the staff and the well-being of the workplace that we are in. And we should have these discussions. We should have these roundtable discussions to say, it's okay, it's fine, what is happening, it's okay. And now, and the minute you've spoken about it, you've got it out of your system, then you can move on.
Exactly.
The two should not influence each other. Your professional life is like you said, Jason, is that you're now blaming a controller because of his disability. Completely two different things. His talent is something very different, and his disability is just there. So we just need to just separate the two and work with and normalize the two.
Yeah.
I do understand that why sometimes though that neutrality might be a better option, because yes, I'm an occupational therapist by background, and as a health professional, you want to go in and check people are okay and help them, right? But particularly in a multicultural place like London or Melbourne, where I'm from, if you're seen to be supporting someone on the other side of that conflict might say, well, if you're supporting that person, they're not supporting me. In fact, so if she's supporting them, she must be against me. And, it might inadvertently cause more harm than help. And again, that would go against all my natural instincts would be to get in there and help. But I think back to my earlier point around what was real inclusion look like, I think the starting point would be something back a step to make sure everyone knows all the time, even before the conflict occurs.
Yep.
You're loved and welcome here. You're all a part of this team.
Absolutely.
And if you're struggling, let us know. Let's talk about that. And so that people feel they can put their hand up regardless of which side of the conflict they're on or whatever it might be. So that's your ideal starting point. Not always possible, of course. But,
you're absolutely right. And there's an interesting comment that I've just picked up in the chat. Quite a strong statement, but I think I would like to call it out because, a lot of people could be seeing this in their workplaces. And it says there's a bigotry, low expectations for people with differences. I find this to be as undermining and challenging as is pure discrimination and abuse. So thank you for whoever has put this in.
can I just comment on that as well?
Of course you can. I was actually going to turn to you, Jason.
Yeah, this is something I've faced my whole life. Particularly in summer, I wear shorts a lot. In a moment, I'll bring my prosthetic leg up on screen so you can see it. Today, it's bright pink. Sometimes it's bright blue. other colours as well. I have a friend with a 3D printer who's making me all these funky covers. Anyway, so it's very visual. And every week or two, I will get told how brave I am for going to Morrison's and buying 2-minute noodles or whatever it might be. Now that's crap. I'm just doing my shopping. I'm not brave to go into Morrison's, not in this suburb anyway. So but people come in with such low expectations to that person's point that they think, wow, that they didn't expect someone with a disability would be out doing their own shopping, that kind of stuff. So their low expectations mean that they think it's brave and inspirational that I'm just doing that. And their words are well-meaning. They do mean to be a compliment, but instead it's actually the opposite. It's just, no, you need to get it. And which is why I have a brightly coloured leg, to show them that people with disability do go out and do this stuff. They do the ordinary. That's not brave. That's not inspirational. That's living day-to-day life. Sure, if they're climbing Mount Everest or doing stuff like that, different story. That is inspirational.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
But shopping
that's
working,
different for anyone, right? Climbing sort of mountains.
Yeah.
I mean, you need lots of training for that. Yeah.
And it is interesting because I've got a similar example, because I'm disabled with my back, severe disability, and it was quite life-changing. And I chose to have 2 little dogs. And yes, it's a big struggle for me to feed them in the morning first thing when I wake up. But I've just adapted where I feed them an hour and a half after waking up. So, it's not a big deal for me. But, and it really resonated with what you said about the shopping. But, I have people saying, oh, it's I really admire you that you still have dogs when, you've got a disability, and how do you look after them and all. And I know them, the genuine compassion, whatever you want to call it. But I just laugh a bit and say, well, it is what it is. I chose to have the dogs. It's just about being clever with adapting certain, movements within your lifestyle. But coming back to this statement, in a workplace, it's absolutely can be very dehumanizing. I think for me, that's the word I'd like to use, is very dehumanizing. And it is, again, the responsibilities of managers to set the tone right. If they set the tone right, everyone will look up to that, and their language will also start to mirror it. So again, thank you to the person who did put that in. I would from here like to move to psychological safety, because I'm conscious of time as well. Now, psychological safety is a term we hear quite a bit in workplace conversations. We often speak about in terms of being able to voice ideas, admit mistakes, ask questions without fear of judgment. But what does it truly mean for people of different backgrounds, ethnicities, faiths, disabilities, and life experiences? And Fawzia, for this, what I'd like to do is I would really like to come to you, because, as someone from an ethnic background yourself, what does this actually look and feel like for someone from a marginalized background, be it ethnic, religious, or otherwise?
Ryan, I think it's, I think we're merging, if we merge all the topics, we can say that for me, psychological safety would be, and I can sort of speak on everyone's behalf, is somewhere safe where you can go and speak and be heard without feeling that you're being judged, and where you feel that you're going to make mistakes. You'll make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have these cultural backgrounds, these different religious, different beings, and you are able to make mistakes without being judged, without being penalized. So that's what psychological safety looks like in that workplace. And also for myself, allowing other people to come into that safe zone as well. So, we can sit and discuss, and we're like Jason said, we're living in London. It's a multicultural city. Then I'm sort of at an institution where we are bringing in so many international students, sort of, every year from different parts of the world, and they're coming with their different sort of cultures, and they're coming with different sort of religions. And what I see a lot. And again, we have to celebrate this and we have to take the positive out. We are very good at trying to create this space. When I see students from the Far East, they do not talk. Initially, when they set foot, they do not talk about anything. Anything that's concerning them, anything that's bothering them, is because it's not their part of their culture. And they start voicing their opinions and they start voicing their problems sort of, I would say, in the second semester when they've seen everybody. And because that psychological safety, that safety is there, that is a safe zone. You can talk about it without feeling, we're penalized. You can talk about it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's a very interesting comment by somebody, and thank you for saying that as someone who has PTSD, ex-military and gay person, so psychological safety to me means I belong in a safe place to speak and show up to be seen. Somebody else has said, I feel psychological safety in the workplace starts feeling able to be our authentic self. And thank you for using that word. It's not about having, a superficial, we all have to have, a certain persona at work. I understand that. But, the true existence, a moral compass, all of that authentic existence of us needs to come in without feeling that we're going to be judged or not heard or not given an opportunity to be ourselves. So thank you for that. Jason, I can see you'd like to say something.
Yeah. I'd like to take the opportunity, if it's okay, Ava, to address the comment before that in the chat.
Sure.
Someone has, I'm sure everyone can read it, but someone's indicated that, that they can't, they're not supportive of Fuzia's and my views around psychological safety. I think this is a great illustration of psychological safety, and I respect everyone's views. This person saying that everyone's too sensitive these days, and we should just accept that there's going to be name calling and all that kind of stuff. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That type of thing, and I get that, I'm really pleased that person feels comfortable to deal with that kind of abuse and or criticism or whatever it might be. But you're going to get a bell curve of people, right? You're going to get some people who can tolerate that at one end, some people who can't at the other. Inclusion's about moving the dial along as much as possible so that more and more people feel psychologically safe. This person, again, good on them, feels psychologically safe even if someone is using racist terms and everything. Good on them. There's a lot of people who wouldn't. And as you move through, there's more and more people that if you swing the pendulum, more and more people feel psychological safety. We're never going to get to one end or the other. And to some point, I agree that you still need to be able to have a joke sometimes in some way, shape, or forms. But you've got to be careful that it doesn't offend people, because different people have got different experiences and different things going on in their lives. And whether, obviously, I'm a white male, so I have a certain level of privilege there, and I accept that. And sometimes I might be ignorant of things going on for people of colour or for women in that space. But as a gay man with disability, I am aware of a whole lot of comments that get made that that don't necessarily offend me, but might offend others. Like, I do not mind, for instance, if someone says, what happened to your leg? But I do know a lot of other amputees who do find that uncomfortable and threatening and not a psychologically safe matter. So psychological safety is about swinging that pendulum along, finding the words to use that mean more people can feel included. Will you be able to include everyone? Probably not, but more people about being included. So
and thank you for go ahead, Fawzia.
Just the last thing, Ryan, and I know you want to wrap up, but this inclusion and psychology, it's active, right? It's not a one-time goal. We need to keep working on it all the time. So that's what, and we need to put policies in place, and we need to have these active sort of agendas and strategies in place so everybody feels safe.
And I think we've got a few questions which I will come to. What I would like to wrap up before we open it up in a few minutes, because I can see people have some comments, and also Fawzia and Jason, you can also have a look at that. So what I'd like to just say is that for for many, psychological safety is not just about speaking up in meetings. It's about feeling seen. And it's about being able to mention parts of their identity, their culture, their beliefs without fear of being misunderstood, ignored, or sidelined. When conversations about well-being and inclusion happen, are they truly inclusive? Can a person talk about the emotional weight of global events without it being labeled as political? Can someone from a collectivist culture express express their emotions differently and still be seen as emotionally intelligent? And these are the deeper layers of psychological safety, I feel, that we don't talk enough about. I'm just going to continue a little bit more. When global tragedies strike certain communities more than others, the silence in workplaces can feel deafening. And in that silence, psychological safety can quickly disappear. And we must ask ourselves and call ourselves out for that, because inclusivity, we can only create safety for those, we need to think that who are we creating safety for? The majority, the minority? True psychological safety is not clinical, it's not tick box. And it's about it's emotional, it's cultural, and it's compassionate. And, leadership isn't about setting the tone. This is my absolute genuine belief. It's about being brave enough to widen the tone so that all voices can be heard. As a gay woman of color myself, a migrant and disabled, someone from a minority faith, psychological safety for me means having the freedom of bringing all parts of myself to work, including the parts that don't always align with the dominant narrative in the room. And whilst I'm just opening it up to the room over here, to the audience, is let's build workplaces where everyone, regardless of race, faith, culture, disability, or country of origin, feels safe enough to be fully human. Real inclusion means noticing the silence and choosing not to stay in it. So I'm going to end my own 2 cents on that, but let's open it up and hear some of the interesting questions, comments that are coming through.
I must say, there's some really good questions
Yeah.
and statements coming through, and I don't know which one you want to pick.
So so I
can
can start with this one where it
delve on that.
says, how as managers do we support people with differing opinions, some which may be considered controversial but not illegal? I think this is a fantastic question. I'm not sure if any of you would like to go for that one. I might have my own thoughts as well, but would any of you like to share your ideas?
I think we have to, you have to respect everyone's opinions. You don't have to agree with them. I'm one of those managers that's quite candid. I'll call it as I see it. If in terms of developing someone in the workplace, forget their opinions for the moment in terms of the world events or whatever. But if someone's not demonstrating the behaviours that we need to, then I will call that and focus on those behaviours and develop that. If they're doing those behaviours really well, I'll call that too and celebrate that. So I think focusing on the behaviours in terms of your interactions with the staff, if you're coaching and developing them, I think that's really, really important. Behaviours rather than the person's background or their culture or their disability or whatever it might be, or their gender identity or sexual preferences, whatever it might be. And if someone does have a differing opinion to you, it's again still focusing. I'm thinking on my feet here, or my foot. It's still focusing on the behaviours. What does that person need from me right now? How can I support them to do that? Within, we've got parameters. We've got HR and employee relations parameters we've got to work within any workplace, and some of those can be more constraining than any EDI issues. Focusing on just those behaviours rather than the opinions, and acknowledging those opinions and acknowledging yours are different. I think
you wrap that up. And also it's about giving the person the respect to voice their opinions in a professional manner, giving the space and the manager to understand the impact it might be having on that person for them to bring it up and to ask curious questions rather than a debate. It's about being curious about it. And I think that's where sometimes managers get it wrong, is where they start debating it. And, it's just about opening it up and understanding it a bit more. So thank you for that. Then, sorry, Fawzia, go
Sorry,
ahead.
but just to add to that, and I think the question said that is with supporting people with differing opinions, and I think as managers we need to just accept we are going to have opinions that are going to be different to your colleagues or your employees and whatever, and like you said, they need to be heard and they need to be acknowledged, and we need to build confidence around the ideology that you can speak to your manager about these things, and that's it. And if it obviously, then you bring in different departments and different HR or other counselors, if that you can sort of signpost your colleague through that. But yeah, we need to acknowledge that as well, that you're going to have differing opinions as well, and it happens. It happens all the time, but you remain professional and you remain kind to each other.
Exactly. And yeah. And the next one is a very interesting one. And I think, Jason, that's more for you and me. And I could give my thoughts on this. And I love how openly they've said it. And it says, I'm sorry, I feel we can't get it right. Then if we comment that we think someone is doing a great job, but are worried it is not valid to comment that with the person, what's the answer? Say something, don't say something. I think most people say it from a really lovely place, championing, overcoming a clear difficulty. It goes back to if you can't say something nice, say nothing at all. If a person is coming with an intent of care and love, are they not to say anything? Or is it only reserved to people who share the same struggles to say something? So for me personally, so I'll share my personal views on that. And then we can move to Jason, or if Fawzia has thoughts as well, is like I use the dog example for myself and my disability and all. I actually think it's quite sweet when people do acknowledge it and say it. I might have internally just laughed a little bit and say, well, it's not a big deal. I can still do it. I will educate them and say it back that actually, it's not as big a compromise, but I do this, this, and this. And they're like, really? And then they ask more questions at the back of that. So I'm very respectful. And I think that's the communication. It has to be a two-way communication between the giver and the receiver. And I'm the receiver at that point. I have to acknowledge and accept that someone said it with genuine respect and care for me. And I'd be absolutely naive and, unfair that I don't take it with that intent. So that's the first thing. And, and then if I have something to educate the person back with, I do. So I would never stop somebody, to stop saying something where they genuinely mean it with that utmost care, love, and respect. So no, for me, I would still encourage people to tell me that, oh, how do you feed your dogs in the morning, or how do you come to work? How are you going to this rave in December on a 12-hour rave in December, which I am actually, with a walking stick. I don't mind people asking me that, and all, but that's just my thoughts, Jason.
It is tricky again. Focusing on behaviours is one way to do it. You're doing this well, you did this well, you did X well, you did Y well. So it doesn't matter then their gender identity, disability, cultural background, whatever. You did this behaviour really, really well. So, or whatever it might be. But if it's the scenario where you're talking about, like, the shops or out in public, where the problem comes from is if you make assumptions. Like if you go up to someone and I'm assuming, Ava, that it's really tough for you to do the shopping, with your walking stick. It might not be. You might have a sad look on your face because something else has happened at home or something tough's going on. Making assumptions about the impact of my disability, that's not okay. Making assumptions that I'm struggling or that someone else might be struggling because they're an Asian in a white environment or whatever, that's not okay. You can still check in with these people as you would with any other human. Are you okay? What's happening? Do you need to talk? But not assuming, do you need to talk because of this scenario and that issue? That's probably where you can just stop short. Offering that connection. But again, the ideal would be that everyone knows that they can come to you even before that. And if I can also say, take it back another level. There's another question actually down there, and this one applies to that too. How do you get more people on board, and how do you get more people to take an inclusive approach if they're not being inclusive? And I think sometimes that's tough for managers if the organisation's not taking a position. I'm very fortunate here at Ingeus. We're doubling down on our EDI initiatives. We're saying, okay, we can see this stuff happening in the US, and while some companies are taking down their pride flags or whatever, we're putting more up. We're doubling down and saying, you know what, no, this still is important to us. EDI is still important to us. We're still putting these things in place. These employee resource groups are an important part of what we're doing. We're sending that message publicly so that to back up the managers and to back up all staff to say, this is important to us as an organisation. So.
Yeah, and some of the more practical examples, because I know somebody has said that how can we encourage them to be more inclusive? Sometimes it's about rephrasing some of the statements, maybe to them to encourage them to rethink. So, sometimes let's rethink how we could rephrase that. So, literally saying that to them, or do you think that comment could land differently with different people? And it's in that light manner, but in that coaching, educational manner that's, quite interesting. I mean, I know in my own personal experience, many years ago, I'd gotten into the situation where a certain member of the SLT, senior leadership team, kept interrupting me and started to share their own viewpoints over mine. And what I said to them later, I just said that I noticed that, you interrupted a few times. Is there a reason for that? And I literally just had those conversations with them. And it's about just, I suppose, at times, in front of such people is to celebrate where other people might not belong to the majority. So, to shout out certain accomplishment of certain staff members who don't fit the majority. And then they just slowly observe it around them. There's a lot of different practical ways of doing that. Or bringing in people from different backgrounds into the conversation with that certain team member, so they're hearing different viewpoints, because there's a direct connection of productivity and diversity at work. So, businesses thrive the more diverse they are as well. There's a direct connection with that. Yes.
If I can just step in, and I think it's just, you hit the nail on the head, is the change comes from within, right? So we also need to acknowledge, and we need to change our terminologies and educate, and you've said that a few times now. Sometimes we just need to educate the other person. They may not know, I mean, giving a very small example, religiously, when I observe Ramadan, it's some people don't know that you don't eat or drink from sunrise to sunset. So it's not about, I would not want to take an offense to that. I would say, well, we just don't do that, and because of the reasons, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes it is about changing the terminology of how you speak to others, and again, respecting each other, kindness, and, creating a safe zone where you can have those communications and those discussions.
And I think there's one other element where somebody's mentioned about the SBI model, but I think there's one element in that, the one word that I need to bring in is, sometimes we might go out with the best intent, but we have a responsibility to think about any potential impact on the audience, whether that audience is one person or 10 people is irrelevant. And, if and it's just the way of talking, isn't it? It's in that respectful way and the intent. And it's to just say it, I'm so sorry, if this causes offense, but I'm just curious. It's like to know this a bit more. That's the approach I take sometimes if I'm a bit naive or ignorant about certain members of my team. And it's allowing them as well as space to ask questions, to discuss anything. And all I say in my opening statements of any of those kind of meetings is, please, whatever you're going to ask, take 30 seconds to think about how it might impact somebody else, and that's it. And if it still impacts somebody else negatively, then it's about talking about that as well, because the other person did think about it. So, it's about managing that very professionally and carefully. That is ultimately the responsibility of managers. Let's see what else has been mentioned, described. Okay, somebody said about the SBI model, which I'm quite familiar with, but it's described the specific context in which the behavior occurred. So during the team meeting on Monday, and then the behavior, provide an objective description For example, you interrupted me while I was explaining the project and then the impact, and this made it difficult for me to convey the points clearly. And I think when you keep it quite clear, concise, that's where it starts to land better with the other person. And that's why I believe the communication is key in diversity, inclusion, and the psychological safety as well, because there's a giver and there's a receiver, and then you have to give that lovely space for people to be who they are and their authentic self. I'm trying to see if there's any other comments that we might have missed out. Apologies if anything's been missed out. If you can copy paste it back at the bottom if someone wants to share something. What I'm planning to do, just thought I'll, while people are just thinking about this the last couple of minutes, that potentially this year, at some point this year, I might do a webinar on just psychological safety itself. So quite a detailed one on that, where there's, we go a bit more into psychological safety. And if that happens, you all will, because you've attended this, will be sent the invite for it if any of you would like to join it, or any other recommendations as well. Oh my God, that's great. At least one person has said, yes, please, Alva. Thank you so much for that. But yes, if the suggestions are there on any other related topics like this that you would like, a webinar or a roundtable discussion, I'm always open to that. CiC is obviously an employee assistance program provider, and we want to make sure that we get these webinars right, where it makes that meaningful impact on yourselves. But it's really getting into the granular details of psychological safety is what I'd love to do. Any last minute thoughts, Jason and Fawzia, from yourself?
Make disability ordinary. On the disability front, just make it ordinary, make it every day. Nothing flash, nothing fancy. A really good example is the London Underground. They've got posters everywhere about people doing stuff. One of those posters, if you don't look, you won't even notice. It's a woman touching on. She's only got one arm. That's just representation, and it's just there's no song and dance. She's just a person with disability who's there being ordinary. That's a brilliant example. And same on the LGBT side, just make it part of what you're doing. You don't have to have pride flags in front of the office every day, but just make sure people can be seen being their authentic selves.
Thank you so much. And Fawzia, any last thoughts from you?
I just would like to thank you for sort of inviting me, and I've learned so much from sort of CiC and from Jason, from how sort of different workplace and how we can create more psychological safety and more inclusivity in our workplace. So really interesting discussion, and something that I would definitely practice at my workplace.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining and for making this quite interactive. Hopefully I will be able to put together a webinar on psychological safety, and all of you will be invited. But I would again like to thank Jason and Fawzia for agreeing to come to this and share their expertise and their experience as well. And have a lovely afternoon, everyone, and see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.